Now I have everything I need. Let me write the new story. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a man who raises his voice. Never have been. 63 years on this earth, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've yelled loud enough for a neighbor to hear. My father was a loud man, slammed drawers, shook walls, made everyone in the house hold their breath waiting for the next sound. I promised myself at 14 years old I would never be him, and I kept that promise. Right through a 34-year marriage, right through the kind of loss that breaks most men in half, right through 4 years of watching my son take everything I had left and treat it like it was already his. I kept that promise all the way up until a Tuesday afternoon in March, when I walked into a pawn shop on the east side of Columbus and looked through a smudged glass case and saw my father-in-law's pocket watch, sitting next to a scratched electric guitar and a pile of somebody else's broken things. I didn't yell then either. That's what I need you to understand. When a quiet man finally runs out of patience, he doesn't yell. He just stops. He goes completely, utterly still. And if you have never been on the receiving end of a quiet man who has finally gone still, I hope for your sake you never find out what that feels like. My name is Dale. I'm 63 years old. I ran a small commercial painting company out of Groveport for 27 years. Built it from a one-man operation in a pickup truck to a crew of 9 at its peak. My wife, Patricia Patty. Everyone called her Patty. She kept the books for 18 of those years, working out of the spare bedroom we'd converted into a home office, a mug of tea always going cold on her desk while she concentrated. We had a good life. Not an extravagant one, a good one. The kind where the vacations were driving trips and the dinners out were birthdays and anniversaries, and you didn't miss the other stuff because you had enough of the stuff that mattered. Patty passed 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from the first symptom to the last day. 7 weeks. That's all she got, and that's all I got to prepare. Our son, Nathan, was 24 when we lost her. He'd been living in Columbus proper by then, working at a bar downtown. Not the kind of work either of us had pictured for him, but Patty always said, "Give him room, Dale, he'll find his footing." She said that right up until she couldn't say anything anymore. I gave him room. Lord, did I give him room? You need to understand something about the watch before any of this makes sense. Patty's father, Gerald, carried that watch every single day of his working life. 41 years as a machinist at a manufacturing plant out in Heath. The watch was given to him by his own father the day he turned 21. A Hamilton pocket watch, railroad grade, 1952, engraved on the inside of the case with 4 words: steady hands, steady heart. Gerald carried it until the arthritis in his fingers got bad enough that he couldn't manage the winding anymore. Then he gave it to Patty on their last Christmas together, before he passed. Patty kept it in a small cedar box on my dresser. After she was gone, I moved it to the drawer of her nightstand. I didn't want to look at it every morning, and I couldn't stand the idea of putting it somewhere I couldn't reach it. So it lived in that drawer. And every few nights, usually on the evenings when the house felt the quietest and the longest, I'd open that drawer, open the cedar box, and hold that watch in my palm. Just hold it. Read those 4 words to myself. Steady hands, steady heart. And for a few minutes, I could hear Gerald's voice. And through that, somewhere further back, I could almost hear Patty's. That watch was the last thing connecting me to a whole side of a life I'd lost. And my son sold it for $350. Let me back this up because I don't want you to think Nathan was a bad kid who came from nowhere. He wasn't. He was a good kid who got handed a bad thing at the wrong age, and then had a father too afraid of losing him to do what needed doing. When Patty got sick, Nathan took it hard. In all the ways you'd expect a 24-year-old to take it hard. He drank more. He worked less. He called me at strange hours sometimes, already slurring, just to talk about her. And I sat on my end of the phone for as long as he needed, every time, because I understood. I understood because I was doing the same thing he was doing, only I was doing it in an empty house by myself without the telephone. The difference between us was I had a business to run. I had 9 people depending on paychecks. I had a mortgage and an insurance bill, and the kind of responsibilities that don't care how much you're grieving. So I got up every morning, and I kept going. And every time Nathan called needing something, I answered, because he was all I had left. First time I gave him money after Patty passed, it was $400 for his electric bill. He said his roommate had skipped out and left him covering the whole thing. I didn't hesitate. Second time was 700 for car repairs on a Civic that frankly should have been sold for parts. After that, the amount started moving around. 300 here, 500 there, once almost 1400 for what he described as a rent gap. I never asked too many questions. I told myself he was grieving. I told myself he was young. I told myself that's what fathers do. What I should have told myself is that every time you hand someone a net to fall into without making them climb back out on their own, you are not helping them. You are teaching them that falling is fine because you will always be there to catch them. And a person who knows they'll always be caught will always find a reason to fall. He never called on my birthday. Not 1 year out of 3. I always called him on his. Always sent a card. Sometimes still put cash in the card, the way you do for a kid, which he wasn't. Not anymore. But somehow I kept doing it anyway. When he'd come out to Groveport for dinner, which got rarer as the months went on, he'd sit across from me with his phone face up on the table and split his attention between whatever was on the screen and whatever I'd cooked. I'd ask about his plans. Vague answers. I'd tell him I was proud of him even when I was stretching to mean it. He'd say thanks the way you say it when you're not really listening. I told myself, at least he comes. At least I still have him. Here's what I know now that I wish I had known then. There is a difference between keeping someone close and just refusing to acknowledge how far away they've already gone. Nathan had been gone for a long time. He was just still calling my number when he needed something. The first time I told him no was 11 days before the watch disappeared. He called on a Wednesday evening. I was on the back porch after dinner, reading the kind of paperback thriller I'd never have admitted to in front of company. He needed $2,000. A business opportunity, he called it. His friend Marcus was starting a food truck and needed a capital partner. And if Nathan got in now, he'd eventually see a real return. I listened to the whole pitch. I'd heard versions of it before, not the food truck specifically, but the energy of it, the feeling of a thing that would definitely work out this time. I said, Nathan, I can't do it. Silence on the line. Then, slower, like he was trying to decide how much force to use. Dad, come on. I've lent you close to $15,000 in the last 3 years. I said it as steady as I could. You've paid back exactly none of it. I'm not saying that to shame you. I'm saying it because I'm 63 years old and I have got to start thinking about where I land when I can't work anymore. I just can't. The silence stretched out and then caved in on itself. So that's it, he said. 40 years, and this is where we are. Nathan, that's not, you know what? Forget it. I'll figure it out myself. I always figure it out myself. He hung up before I could finish the sentence. He didn't call back that night. I figured he needed a few days to cool off, the same way he always did, the same way he always had since he was 17, and I wouldn't let him take the car to a concert 2 hours away on a school night. He'd go quiet. Then he'd come back around. He did come back around. He just came back around through my bedroom while I was at work, with a key I'd given him 3 years ago for emergencies. I found out the watch was gone on a Friday. I'd had a long day out on a job site in Reynoldsburg, the crew working a commercial repaint on a strip mall that was behind schedule. I got home a little after 6. I wasn't planning to open the drawer. I wasn't in one of those moods where I needed to hold the watch and hear those words in my head. I just went upstairs to change out of my work clothes, and something made me stop at the nightstand. Some instinct. The same instinct that tells you when a room is slightly different than how you left it, when something is present that shouldn't be, or absent that should. I opened the drawer. The cedar box was there, right where it lived. I picked it up, and I already knew. The weight was wrong. Cedar box alone is nearly nothing. Cedar box with a Hamilton pocket watch in it has a kind of satisfying solidity to it, the kind you don't notice until it's gone. I opened it. The velvet interior, the shape pressed into it from 40 years of the watch sitting in the same spot, empty. I stood in my bedroom doorway for I don't know how long, holding an empty box, not thinking anything yet, just holding it, the way you hold the last moment, before a thing becomes real. Then I set the box down and picked up my phone. Nathan, where is your grandfather's watch? 3 minutes of silence. Then, what are you talking about? The Hamilton. In the cedar box. In the nightstand. It's gone. A pause that lasted slightly too long. Dad, I don't know anything about a watch. Here's the thing about being a man who has raised another man from the beginning. You know the specific sound of his lying voice. Not because he's lied to you constantly, but because you've known his honest voice for 27 years, and anything that isn't it sounds off in a way that you feel somewhere in your back teeth. Nathan, did you come into this house? Another pause. I had to grab something last week. When you were at work, I still have a key. You took the watch. I didn't take it, Dad. I borrowed the asset. I needed it short term. I was going to buy it back before you even. You pawned your grandfather's watch. The word grandfather landed. I heard it land in the silence that followed. Gerald wasn't Nathan's grandfather by blood. Patty was Nathan's mother. Gerald was Patty's father, which made him a grandfather by everything except the word people use when they're trying to minimize something they've done. It was just sitting there, he said. It's not like you use it. And there it was. It's not like you use it. 32 years of his mother's history reduced to a question of utilization. A watch that a man carried for 41 years. That 4 words were engraved into. That sat in a cedar box in a drawer. That I opened on my worst nights because it helped me feel less alone. And my son reduced it to something I wasn't using. I hung up the phone. I did not yell. I am telling you again, I did not yell. I put the empty cedar box in my jacket pocket, and I walked out to my truck, and I drove east on Broad Street into Columbus, and I went to every pawn shop I could find on that side of town. I had a photo of the watch on my phone from 2 years ago, a picture I'd taken to send to Nathan's cousin who collects vintage watches and had asked about it once. I walked into 3 shops and showed the photo and got nothing. The 4th shop was called Golden State Loan and Pawn, which is a funny name for a place in Columbus, Ohio. The man behind the counter was heavyset, maybe 50, wearing a Franklin County Fair t-shirt from what looked like a decade ago. His name tag said Phil. I showed Phil the photo. He looked at it for a second, then looked at me, then went into the back without saying anything. He came out holding the cedar box. My hands steadied. My entire body steadied, the way Patty used to say, I went when something was serious. Like the volume of the world just dropped 10 notches. How much did you give for it? I said. $350, Phil said. Young guy. Had ID. Signed. The form. I told Phil what it was and where it came from. I told him about Gerald and the 41 years and the 4 words on the inside of the case. Phil was quiet through all of it. When I finished, he set the box down on the counter between us and folded his hands. I want to give this back to you, he said. I genuinely do. But the law doesn't let me just hand stolen property back over the counter without a police report and an ownership document. You understand. If you've got proof it's yours, get me a detective and the paperwork, and I'll hold it in my safe until this is sorted. No charge. But I can't just hand it over. I had proof. Gerald had transferred ownership to Patty formally, and I had that document in my file cabinet at home, because Patty kept records of everything. Every receipt, every certificate, every document that mattered, in a file drawer that I hadn't been able to bring myself to clean out. I thanked Phil, took his card, and drove back to Groveport. That drive home. People always want to know what a person thinks about on a drive like that. I'll tell you. I thought about the first time Nathan played Little League. 8 years old, third base, and he had no arm. But he had this particular kind of determination on his face, like he'd die before he let a ball get past him. Patty sat beside me in those aluminum bleachers laughing at something I'd said, and the late afternoon light was the exact color of October. I thought about the night he graduated high school, how he hugged me in the parking lot after. Really hugged me. The kind where you can feel a person deciding something about who they are in that moment. I thought about what Patty would say if she could see this. And I knew she would be heartbroken. And I also knew, because I knew her better than I've ever known anyone, that she would tell me this is the part where you stop catching him, Dale. This is the part where loving him means letting him land. I found the ownership transfer document in Patty's files in about 4 minutes. Her handwriting was on the folder tab. Dad's watch title documents. Even now, she was taking care of things. The detective who came out to Golden State the next morning was a woman named Carla Weston. Compact, brisk, the kind of person who makes you understand within 30 seconds that she has heard every version of every family situation and maintained her patience through all of them. She cross-referenced the documents against the watch, confirmed the serial number, and filled out the hold order and the theft report at the same time. Then she stopped writing and looked up at me. Mr. Whitmore, the individual named on the intake form as the seller is your son. Yes. You understand that filing this complaint means we'll be issuing a warrant for his arrest. Yes. She looked at me the way Detective Weston probably learned to look at people in situations like this. Not unkindly. Just directly. The way someone looks at you when they need to make sure you are choosing something and not just drifting into it by accident. He's your son, she said, in case you hadn't considered what comes next. I've considered it, I told her. For 3 years I've been considering it. I just kept choosing different than this. She nodded once, filled out the rest of the form. As she left, she said, I'll be in touch within 48 hours. Then she put on sunglasses that looked slightly too large for her face and walked out to her cruiser. Phil held the watch. I thanked him for the 3rd time. He waved me off. Go home, he said. Like he'd said that to enough people in enough strange situations to know it was usually the right next instruction. I drove home, 40 minutes on 270 North, late morning light sitting flat and white on the highway. I thought about what Nathan would do when the knock came. I thought about whether he'd call me first. I found, somewhere around the Morse Road exit, that I was genuinely uncertain how I felt about either possibility. What I was not uncertain about was that I was not going to stop it. That part had settled somewhere deep, the way deep things settle, without drama, without needing to be argued into position. It simply was. He did call me first. The day after I filed the report. He must have gotten wind of it somehow, the way people do. Dad, what did you do? It wasn't a question. It was the same tone Brooke had used in the airport scene in the story I'd been watching the whole thing unfold through, that flat, accusatory thing people say when they've done the wrong thing and need to immediately find a way to make you responsible for the consequence. I told Detective Weston the truth. Nathan, you filed a theft report on your own son. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was maybe 15. Do you understand what that means for me? Do you understand what happens to my life if I have a felony? I understand it better than you think. I could hear him breathing. Then, you did this to hurt me. No, I said. If I wanted to hurt you, I've had 3 years of chances and I never took a single one. I did this because I've been so afraid of losing you that I forgot I was losing myself. I did this because your mother's father carried that watch for 41 years. And it says steady hands, steady heart on the inside of the case, and you sold it to a pawn shop for $350 without calling me to tell me you were desperate. And Nathan, here is the thing I need you to hear. If you had called me, I probably would have helped you. Not the $2,000 for the food truck, but something. If you had just called me and said, Dad, I'm drowning, I probably would have come. But you didn't call me. You came into my house while I was at work. And that is the difference. That is the thing I cannot let go this time. Silence. I want you to tell them it was a misunderstanding. I can't do that. More silence. Then, very quietly, in a voice that sounded more like his 8-year-old self than his 27-year-old self, Dad, I don't know what to do. And that hit me somewhere real. I want you to know, it hit me somewhere real. Because underneath everything, he was still the kid in those aluminum bleachers. Still the boy who hugged me in the parking lot after graduation. Still the person I'd taught to ride a bike and tie a half-hitch knot and properly shake a man's hand. He was still my son. I know you don't, I said. And I am truly sorry that I waited until it got here before I helped you understand that your choices have weight. That is on me, as much as it is on you. But Nathan, you are 27 years old, and this is the first thing, in 3 years, that you are going to have to figure out without my help. And I believe you can. I believe that about you even now. I need you to start believing it about yourself. He hung up. He didn't yell. Maybe that part he got from me. They arrested him 2 days later. I did not go and watch. That felt like it would have been something else, something that had more to do with me than with helping him. I stayed home. I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee, and I let the morning do what mornings do in March in Ohio, which is deliver a cold gray light that doesn't apologize for being what it is. Detective Weston sent a text at 10:14 a.m. He's in custody. Watch has been formally recovered as evidence. You'll get it back after processing, likely a few weeks. I set the phone down, and looked at the backyard. Patty's old garden bed's still there. The raised ones Gerald helped me build the summer before Nathan was born. Nothing planted in them for 3 years. I'd told myself every spring I'd get back to it. I never did. He spent 2 nights in the Franklin County facility before a bail hearing. Bail was set, and his friend Marcus of the food truck venture posted it. I found that out through Nathan's cousin, who'd heard from Nathan directly and called me to make sure I knew and to ask me, carefully, if I was doing all right. I told him I was doing better than I had been in a while. He seemed to believe me, or maybe he was just kind enough not to press. The weeks that followed moved strangely. Quiet, but a different kind of quiet than the quiet I'd been living in for 3 years. That quiet had weight to it, the weight of things unsaid and edges avoided, and a life I was holding together by myself while pretending it wasn't an effort. This quiet was lighter, like the house had let out a breath. I canceled the credit card I'd attached Nathan to 2 years ago for what I'd told myself was emergencies. I called my attorney and made sure my name was off any accounts he could access. I updated my will, which I should have done the year after Patty died, which I'd been putting off because sitting in an attorney's office thinking about what happens to your things felt too much like admitting she was really gone. 6 weeks after the arrest, Nathan came to the house. He called first this time, which was new. He said, "Can I come by? I just want to talk." I said yes. He looked thinner. His eyes had the particular quality of someone who has spent real time alone with their own thoughts and found the company harder than expected. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table he'd sat across from me at 100 times, with his phone face up between us. The phone stayed in his pocket this time. He said, "I don't expect you to apologize, and I'm not coming here to fight. I just want to say that I understand why you did it. And I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need to say it." I let that sit. He said, "I was treating you like a problem to manage, instead of a person." I said, "Yes, you were." He said, "Mom would be ashamed of me." I said, "She would be heartbroken." That's different from ashamed. She never stopped believing you could do better. She got that from Gerald, I think. Those 4 words. He nodded. His eyes went somewhere for a second. "I'm not asking you to bail me out of this," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to say that out loud to you, in person, so you knew I knew." I told him I heard him. I told him I meant every word of the phone call, that I believed he could figure this out, that I was not going to be a resource he could pull from going forward, not until I saw something different, something sustained and real, and that I wanted, more than anything, to still be his father in the way that the word actually means. Not a funding source, not a safety net, a father. He sat with that. Then he asked, quietly, what happened to the watch? I told him it was being held as evidence, that I'd get it back when the case was processed, that it was fine, it was safe, Phil had taken good care of it. He nodded. He looked at the table. "I'm glad it's okay," he said. "I know you are," I said. And I meant that. He left 20 minutes later. He shook my hand at the door. Not the hug from the parking lot after graduation. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But a handshake. Eye contact. Steady. The watch came back to me on a Wednesday in late May. Detective Weston dropped it off personally, which surprised me. She handed me a small evidence envelope. I signed a form, and she said, "Hope things get better from here," in a tone that was somehow both professional and entirely sincere. I went upstairs. I opened the cedar box and set the watch back in its place, closed the lid, set it in the nightstand drawer. The weight was right again, that satisfying solidity. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while. I thought about Patty. I thought about Gerald. Steady hands, steady heart. I thought about whether I'd been steady these past 3 years, and I knew the honest answer was no. Not the way those words mean it. Steady hands, steady heart doesn't mean absorbing everything quietly. It means not wavering when it matters. It means holding the line when the line is the thing keeping someone you love from going over an edge they can't come back from. I think Gerald knew something when he chose those words. I think he passed them to Patty because she had them naturally. And I think Patty kept the watch on my dresser because some part of her knew I was still learning them. The case resolved 4 months later. Nathan's attorney negotiated it down to a misdemeanor with restitution and community service. No felony. He'll carry the misdemeanor for a while. It won't stop him if he decides to do something with his life. It might even help, in the way that a scar from a burn helps you remember not to touch the same thing twice. He has a job now, real one, warehouse logistics, not glamorous, but steady, and he came by in September to give me an envelope with $60 in it. Said he knew the original debt was much larger, and this was just the start. I told him what mattered wasn't the $60. He said he knew that. I think he did. Some evenings now I open that nightstand drawer and take out the cedar box and hold the watch the same way I always have. Sometimes I just read those 4 words and set it back without doing anything else. And sometimes, on the evenings, when the neighborhood is quietest, I sit there with it in my palm, and I think about all of it. Gerald and his 41 years, Patty and her file cabinet, and her growing instinct, and the 7 weeks I'll never stop wishing had been 7 years. A boy with no arm, and all the determination in the world on his face at third base in the October light. A man I raised learning, late but not too late, what it costs to take what isn't yours. I didn't do this to my son. I want you to know that whoever you are, listening from wherever you're listening from, whether you're a parent who sees yourself in this, or a son or daughter who sees themselves in Nathan, I didn't do this to him. I just finally stopped being the reason he didn't have to do better. And some nights, sitting in this quiet house, I think that is the most loving thing I've ever done for him in his life, including all those years when I thought catching him was steady hands, steady heart. That's all. That's all it ever was.